Imagery, landscapes, and the environment play a key role in defining the tone within literature, along with providing a backdrop for the setting in which the narrative takes place. The author's job is to then give the setting life, painting scenes in which the setting becomes a living, breathing character in its own right. We see the setting harbor emotional attachment or disdain within the narrative's descriptions. To sum it up, setting within the story is an extremely important device because it can hide underlying themes within the details. An interesting perspective emerges when introduced to post-colonial literature on both sides of the imperialism. The conquered and the conquered, two opposite ends of the colonial spectrum, describe the new lands and world with differing tone and mood. The conqueror's language suggests a disdain and disgust when examined in Marlowe's description of the Congo in Heart of Darkness, while the narrator Sabine speaks of the place his ancestors were enslaved on with warmth and awe. We see that the conquered are making the best out of the land, while the conqueror looks to take the best out of the land with their rhetoric on both sides. When examining how the imperialists describe his conquered lands versus the slave describing the land he was enslaved on, we see a different imagery and mood. Within Heart of Darkness, the narrator Marlowe likens blank spaces on maps to be pockets of darkness. The same way the Romans viewed the Britons on the island. The description of this Congo expedition reveals a disgust for the wild land of King Leopold's personal ventures. Much to how the Romans viewed the barbarous islands in the north, Joseph Conrad wrote Heart of Darkness in a mostly personal perspective, revealing prejudice against the Congo River and the landscape that surrounds it, especially the people as well. As Marlowe approaches the coast of Africa, he says, I watch the coast. Watching a coast as it slips by the ship is like thinking about an enigma. There it is before you, smiling, frowning, inviting, grand, mean, insipid, or savage, and always mute with an air of whispering. Come and find out, this one was almost featureless, as if still in the making, with an aspect of monotonous grimness, the edge of a colossal jingle so dark green as to be almost black, fringed with white surf, ran straight like a ruled line. Far, far away, the land seemed to glisten and drip with steam. Here and there, grayish, whitish specks showed up and clustered inside the white turf, a flag flying above them, perhaps. Settlements some old and still no bigger than pinheads on the untouched expanse of their background. The words within this passage are loaded. Marlowe describes the African coast as featureless, monotonous, grimness, dark green as to be almost black and fierce. His initial reaction to seeing a land he's never been to before is a way to gauge how Marlowe really feels about the African continent. A savage, untamed entity. When embarking on his journey for Kurtz, he describes the river saying, the reaches opened before us and closed behind, as if the forest had stepped leisurely across the water to bar the way for our return. We penetrated deeper and deeper into the hearts of darkness. His way of describing the jungle as a gatekeeper to the river really parallels imagery to that of the Styx River within the underworld. Marlowe clearly uses imagery and details to suggest that the setting in which his story takes place can rival the very depths of hell itself. His rhetoric holds contempt for the river, in which he works on selecting rhetoric that advances negative emotion. Coming from a civilized country such as Great Britain, Marlowe would not understand the significant role the jungle plays in the key survival of thousands of different species, humans alike. His view on the jungle comes from a perspective of ruler and order, saying, going up that river was like traveling back to the earliest beginnings of the world when vegetation rioted on the earth, and the big trees were kings, an empty stream, a great silence, an impenetrable forest. Now, imagery like that doesn't suggest a tropic getaway, but something more so like this description inflicts a sense of silent terror, as if something is watching from the deep jungle, ready to pounce on its prey. What Marlowe fears the most is the unknown. Like adventurers and conquerors before him, the mission was to fight the unknown, to tame the unknown. Through rhetoric and fear, imperialists like Sir Walter Raleigh were able to achieve their goal of looting and pillaging with reckless abandonment. The disrespect and disgust for colonial lands created a superiority complex within the minds and hearts of Europeans, looking at these exotic, far-off lands as ugly, savage, and exploitable for European markets. The land that the conquerors took was not their home, so they did not care for the well-being of it. They did not see the beauty for what their conquered lands displayed, but looked to turn the definition of beauty upside down, until the majestic great expanse of the Congo jungle became a dark and terrible place. Derek Walcott's Schooner's Flight follows the journey of a man who goes by Shabin, the waters of the Caribbean Sea. Shabin is a mixed-race man, descendant of slaves living in a foreign land that his forefathers were brought to for profit. Shabin is the colonized man, tracing his lineage to the people Marlowe called savages, and yet also tracing it back to Marlowe's own people. In Schooner's Flight, Shabin opens up the poem with a beautiful description of the island he's fleeing. His rhetoric, meter, tone, and imagery is breathtaking. Just watch this rendition of the opening stanza.
Maria Conception was all my thought. Watching the sea heaving up and down as the port side of dories, schooners, and yachts was painted afresh by the strokes of the sun, signing her name with every reflection. I knew when dark-haired evening put on her bright silk at sunset, and, folding the sea, sidled under the sheet with a starry laugh, that there'd be no rest, there'd be no forgetting. It's like telling mourners round the graveside about resurrection. They want the dead back. So I smiled to myself as the bow rope untied and the flat swings seaward. It's no use repeating that the sea have more fish. I ain't want her, dressed in the sexless light of a seraph. I want those round brown eyes like a marmoset, and till the day when I can lean back and laugh, those clothes that tickle my back on sweating Sunday afternoons like a crab on wet sand. As I worked, watching the rotting waves come past the boat as he saw the sea like silk, I swear to you all, by my mother's milk, by the stars that shall fly from tonight's furnace, that I love them, my children, my wife, my home. I love them as poets love poetry, that kills them, as drowned sailors the sea. You ever look up from some lonely beach and see a far schooner? Well, when I read this poem, each phrase could be soaked in salt.
The color he uses in his words bring out the spectrum of the Caribbean's lush, abundance gray in the dawn, brown islands, laventile pink. The color palette sets the mood to what seems like a hopeless situation. A man leaving his family and a beautiful wife to the backdrop of an equally beautiful sunrise. The beginning is tragic as Shabin claims he remembers when the slums of Empire used to be paradise. Every description within the poem paints out like an elongated photograph. Just listen to what Shabin says about the ports. The port sides of dories, schooners, and yachts was painted afresh by the strokes of the sun, singing her name with every reflection. I knew when dark-haired evening put on her bright silk at sunset, and, folding the sea, sidled under the sheets with her starry laugh. His choice of words paints the image as a woman. Shabin's admiration for her spills onto the page as we witness a beautiful series of transitions from light to night. This admiration Shabin holds for his setting invokes a sense of devotion to the sea and the sky around him, a connection he does not share with his ex-lover Marie Concepcion. Shabin shows a personal connection to the land he had been trapped on, as opposed to the relationship Marlowe shares with the Congo, in which he speaks on it with contempt. Shabin speaks with a tender way, tiptoeing between the lines of enamoration and fear. Shabin mentions his panic and break from the sea, saying, "This Caribbean so choked with the dead that when I would melt in emerald water whose ceiling rippled like a silk salt, I saw them corals, brain, fire, sea, fans, dead men's fingers, and then the dead men. I saw that the powdery sand was their bones, ground white from Senegal to San Salvador. So I panicked third dive and surfaced for a month in the seaman's hostel. With the Caribbean's beauty also comes her wrath. Shabine and Marlowe share an innate fear of the environment around them, but in different ways. Marlowe shares the fear of the unknown, while Shabine contains the fear of it as God, labeling it friend while also praising and fearing it at the same time. Shabine's fear his setting with respect, while Marlowe is void of respect for his setting entirely. Finally, finally, we see Shabine sign off in an epic way underneath the moon and the stars in the dark of the night. As the sea takes him away, he writes, "I study the stars, sometimes it's just me, and the soft scissors foam as the deck turned white and the moon opened. A cloud like a door, and the light over me is a road in white moonlight taking me home. Shabine sang to you from the depths of the sea." See, Shabine's tone when it comes to the sea wavers much like the waves, back and forth between awe and fear, yet with more awe. Shabine's imagery and eloquence makes me question and dispute the testaments of Marlowe in regards to the Congo River. Had these two men switched places? Would their accounts mirror their original sentiments? I believe Marlowe's description should not be fully trusted, as the Congo is so lush with life, vegetation, green, and energy, and yet I also believe Shabine's testament should be taken to an extent onto his obvious affliction with the sea. I can attest that in both the two artists' own bias, they evoked an emotion in their description of their settings, bleeding their raw, vivid accounts of exotic places to the tune of their own style, each with differing effects and consequences. Shabine's account of his home has attracted many tourists and outside factors into his home, ready to witness the beauty and awe that the Caribbean Sea offers, turning many islands Shabine believes to be free into elite neo-colonial hubs of debauchery. On the other hand, the Congo River remains a fairly impoverished, beautiful country, retaining some aspects of culture yet continuing the cycle of war, making it a dangerous tourist destination, and less ideal to venture deep into the way Marlowe had before. The rhetoric of setting plays a key role in deciding its fate. We see that these writers are writing their emotions out, and these consequences happen because of the rhetoric and because of the emotion that they invoke. I believe that the colonizer and the colonizer share two different perspectives, and that the colonized has more of a respect for the land and the environment than the colonizer, who only looks to gain and exploit from it. The differing imagery and ideals of both ends of the spectrum create an interesting dynamic when comparing and contrasting the two. It shows that the imperialists are there for gains, and much of their false pretense that they were there for Christianity and conversion, they were really there to exploit, while the colonized show such a very non violent way of treating the land that it kind of allows the colonizers to do what they wish. And we see that this trauma plays out in Shabin's memory and um, as well as Marlowe's PTSD after the Congo. And it plays with their mentality, and it plays with how we as well are shaped when reading and studying these works, because we begin to understand the mind of our colonizer as well as our former colonizers beginning to realize the horrors that their ancestors may have committed. And it shows how powerful and great imagery and setting plays a role in literature, and how it can basically define locations, places, countries, and entire cultures sometimes. Thank you.